A St. Michael family mourns the brutal killing of a loved one. That's the story we're tracking in your Barbados Today Evening News Update for Wednesday, July 11. With the news, I'm Fernella Wedderburn. Thanks for joining us. They have taken my child away from me. That was the heartbreaking cry of Hazel Clark, the mother of the island's latest murder victim, Pauline Clark. The 38-year-old woman was shot multiple times at Civilian Road, Bushell, St. Michael last night. At the time of the shooting, Clark was with her 17-year-old daughter, who was also injured in the incident. When Barbados Today visited the grieving family at Halls Road, Hazel could hardly hold back the tears as she recounted the dreaded event.
All I could do that I know she went to the gym, and the daughter told me this morning that when they come out and get in the car, she rolled down the glass, and just as she start the car, they see this man approaching in all black, and she rolled back at the glass, and he went in. There go 4 shots, I think, she said. Okay. That's all I can tell. When I saw my child there, you know, her face swelled up big, and all the blood coming through her mouth.
The mother urged police to find those responsible for taking her daughter's life. She remembered Pauline as loving and a quiet person.
Pauline is a very pleasant person. She have a lot of friends. She and nobody don't get in no company. Suddenly the police was asking me if she and anybody had any row. I said, well, I turn and tell them not to my know, and she and nobody don't get in, and she don't be in nothing.
The tragedy has also shaken former politician and community activist Hamilton Lashley. Lashley, who is a neighbor of the deceased, said the residents of Halls Road will sorely miss Pauline, who was an outstanding woman.
They are very, very, very hurt and shocked, to know that one of our wonderful community persons here in Chase Gap Halls Road was so tragically shot down, so brutally murdered. And of course, I'm hoping that the perpetrators of this obscene evil be brought to justice as soon as possible, whatever it takes. But when the community loses such a wonderful, beautiful, and compassionate individual, then the whole community mourns together. It is at this time that the community will rally around the family, and of course we become one family in this gap. And I'm sure that my sentiments, and if you ask anyone else in this gap, would reflect the same kind of feelings. She's a person that you miss, and we really miss.
A 45-year-old St. Michael man is nursing a stab wound after he was attacked on the premises of the Abundant Life Assembly Church at Bank Hall, St. Michael last night. Police say the man, whose name has not been disclosed, was seated in a parked car with a female when they were approached by an unknown man armed with a knife. The attacker ordered the man out of the car, and there was an altercation in which the victim suffered a wound to his chest. He was taken to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, while the assailant fled the scene on foot. Police are continuing their investigations. One of the island's main investment firms serves notice that it is not prepared to readily invest in government papers, even when the ongoing debt restructuring program is completed, unless the returns match the risk. At its second annual launch and learn session, Chief Investment Officer of Fortress Fund Managers, Peter Annander, told journalists the government's aggressive debt restructuring plan is unpleasant but necessary. He says Fortress will be keeping a close eye on the developments.
We felt that investors in government bonds were not being compensated for the very real and rising and substantial risks of permanent capital loss. And it's unfortunately the exact extent of that capital loss that's being negotiated now between creditors and the government. So, we are certainly not a cause for happiness, right? But we've erred on the side of caution, as Chris was saying, for a number of years. And our next step is as the situation normalizes, and to be honest, the situation of restructuring and negotiations could take could be a matter of multiple months. Right? This is not an instantaneous process, but as it goes through, as the creditworthiness of the government on the other side of this process comes out, we're open for business, right? We're ready and able to look at things again once the return for our investors is commensurate with the risks that we're taking.
Just under 2 weeks after taking over the reins of government on May 24, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Mia Mottley announced an immediate suspension of payments due to domestic and external creditors as government sought to restructure the island's staggering debt. While countries in the Commonwealth Caribbean declared independence from Great Britain over the last 50 years, they have not escaped colonialism when it comes to their constitutions. So says Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of the West Indies Cavell campus, Professor David Berry. Speaking at the opening session of the three-day conference entitled Legal History and Empires, Perspectives from the Colonized, he said there is a savings law clause which brings together countries from changing laws dating back to the colonial era, which were not changed at the time of independence.
In some of the Commonwealth Caribbean territories, we have something called a savings law clause, or an existing law clause. And recently, the Caribbean Court of Justice struck down mandatory capital punishment for Barbados. I haven't read the judgment in full, but I know that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights also required Barbados to change something called its savings law clause, or existing law clause. And what that part of the Constitution does is says any laws in force prior to independence, which have not been changed, are saved and essentially immunized from legal scrutiny by our own judges. So you cannot challenge them under the Bill of Rights.
He, however, noted that there have been some success stories among the Caribbean's indigenous people.
Dominica, Guyana, Belize have very strong indigenous populations. They have been challenging the legal systems and the decisions of governments, their own governments, using various legal structures, including the Inter-American System of Human Rights. And Guyana has been very successful, the Guyanese indigenous peoples. And one of our former students was the chief of one of the Mayan groups that brought the case. So we were very excited to have him here in the faculty learning laws. So there are many issues still outstanding that have to be addressed in our region.
In sports, Croatia will play France in the World Cup final after they beat England 2-1 in extra time today, thanks to a Mario Mandzukic goal in the second period of extra time. Kieran Trippier's free kick after 5 minutes gave England a dream start to the semi-final, but Croatia clawed their way back into the match when Ivan Perisic equalized with a 68th minute volley.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
To regional news, an official of the OECS has expressed concern about child abuse cases in the region, and she is pleading with citizens to take a stand against the scourge. We get more in this report from HTS News Force.
The practitioner of human and social development says safeguarding the future generation against abuse is the responsibility of everyone.
If you know of an act of child abuse happening, it doesn't matter to whom or where, even if you just suspect. It is better to find out that your suspicions were unfounded than to do nothing about it and find out tomorrow that it was far worse than you thought it was. Please do something. Please say something. And be that voice for a voiceless child. And be that pillar for a child, whether yours, your family, or your neighbor. Stamping out child abuse is not a single person's job. It's not my job as a person in the commission or as a person in the government or even a Kiwanis member. It's everybody's responsibility.
And further afield in Thailand, wearing hospital masks and gowns and waving to family members through protective glass, the freed Thai soccer players are finally able to have a reunion of sorts. After almost 3 weeks trapped in the dark, away from their loved ones in a cave in northern Thailand, the boys aged 11 to 16 were allowed to see their relatives in a carefully controlled environment as doctors remain concerned about their health.
What I see is they obviously have the masks on, which their immune systems have probably been a little weakened by what they've gone through over the last couple of weeks. They are, we saw a couple of the boys standing intermittently on their phones. So, by all accounts, they look pretty good. We do know from the hospital briefing that took place last night that on average they lost about 4 pounds. There's still concerns about lung infection in at least a couple of the boys. But overall, a very, very favorable report from them.
And that's news and sports. But for the very latest, visit our website at www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, and like us on Facebook, and sign up for our breaking news alerts via WhatsApp. We're also on Izumi Media and bus terminals, as well as screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. And you can also hear us on Mix 96.9 FM. I'm Fernella Weatherburn. Good evening.